Hey everyone, my name is Ben Black. I'm the lead developer of the Game Jam game Ragnarok, and this is my devlog. So for those of you who don't know, Game Jam is when you have a set amount of time to make a game completely from scratch based on a theme that is given to you at the start of the jam. In this case, the theme was Stronger Together, and the time frame was 1 week. As soon as we learned that the theme was going to be Stronger Together, we immediately called and started concepting out sort of what we wanted to do with that theme. We started thinking about a 2-player local game that was sort of Lego Star Wars-esque and that was heavily based around Norse mythology and that awesome story arc around Ragnarok. We thought we could make a really good story, a really compelling story around Ragnarok, and we thought there were a lot of ways that the project could go from there. So we decided to sit on that and look around for assets on the asset store that could fit that vision. After a bit of time looking around in the asset store, we found a great asset by Sinti Studios, the Polygon Vikings pack, which fit what we wanted perfectly. It was a direct match to what we wanted, and from that point we decided to sleep on the idea, and then the next day we confirmed that it was what we wanted to do and continued forward. On the second day, after we had confirmed that the Ragnarok Norse mythology idea was what we wanted to go with, we started working on the base players and sort of what that entailed. So we had planned for 2 players locally. One player would be the champion, and the other player would be like a god camera that could cast down powers and help the champion out. And the champion's role would be to do the actual fighting on the ground and kill the enemies directly in melee. Once we sort of got that figured out, and how we wanted the 2 players to synergize and really work well effectively so that playing just with one would be super difficult, but playing with both would be a reasonable level of difficulty, we sort of split up our work. Kai began working on the God Cam, and I began working on the champion. Initially, I went with just a straight, normal melee combat script that works well, really simple, and was pretty good until I realized that the player was gliding along the ground when he was swinging his sword, which was a big problem and was really bothering me. But because it was only 1 day, I didn't have enough time to fix it and went to sleep feeling a bit frustrated that I couldn't get the combat to feel right. It felt slow and weird and sort of not as engaging as I wanted it to be. So that was sort of frustrating. And Kai made some good headway on the God Cam. He managed to get the sort of RTS camera all working, and it was shaping up pretty well, but just the combat wasn't how we wanted it to be. And that brought us to the end of day 2. On the third day, I started by polishing the player up and making it just feel a lot better. I decided to use inverse kinematics for the player's movement so that its movement would better match the animations that I had put on it. And then from that, the combat system evolved, and I was able to make a dodge and a block, and that sort of added a lot to how combat felt in the game and how the character felt to the player. And it was really crisp and clean, and I was pretty happy with it, so I decided to sort of leave that aside. And then while I was doing that, Kai got the God Camera's powers up and running so that he could buff the player, heal the player, drop electricity and bombs on the enemies, and do all that stuff. Another thing that we decided to do on this day was to add a wolf that was controlled by the God Cam by clicking around on the map on what enemies you wanted it to attack. And that sort of brought us to the end of the third day. I didn't get as much done as I wanted to, but that's sort of what you got to deal with during a game jam. You don't really get all that you wanted to do done sometimes. So that brings us into the fourth day. On the fourth day, we actually did a lot of work I set aside the player and decided to start making as many levels of the game as possible. I started with a village scene that the player would start in and that Ragnarok would start in. And then I moved it to like a icy mountain scene that the player could battle in. And then from there I moved it to a more foresty, grassy scene. In hindsight, the progression doesn't really make sense. Like, it's going from a wintry village to icy mountains, and then all of a sudden it goes back to greenery. But at the time I didn't really realize that, and when I did, it was too late to fix it, so I just left it. We also fine-tuned the Godcam's wolf, which was actually working really well, and we really liked how it was interacting with the player. Now, in the times that the Godcam wasn't really doing much, he could be controlling the wolf and occupy his attention that way. Also, we had finally decided on a proper name for the Godcam, which is the Odin Cam, and that was going to be sort of like the story character of the Godcam. That wrapped up day 4, and I actually went to sleep that day feeling pretty good. 3 out of the 5 levels, very solid number, and I was pretty pleased with myself for getting that much done in one day. On the 5th day, it was a lighter day. We sort of took a bit of a break, which I regretted later. We made Odin's powers do damage and actually interact with enemies, and we also integrated the split screen properly. Up until this point, the Godcam and Player Cam were in different scenes, and we hadn't really seen them all together with their UI, and that was a really big step for the project. I think it made us feel a lot better about how it was looking. And I also added bosses, which was huge. I really was like, geez, our enemies aren't that varied, and they're not that exciting. So I decided at the end of each level, I would make a boss character. I used the Cinti Polygon Rivals pack assets for that. So there was like a big elemental golem and ice giant that you can see on screen now, that had all these awesome sort of boss attacks that made the end of levels feel way more interesting for the player. I also, on that day, added sound to footsteps, and just a bit more sound in general, like combat sounds, and I also made the sound of the footsteps change on different materials that you walked on. I pulled that script in from another project that I had done a bunch of work on, and that made the game feel a lot better, feel way more interactive. We decided that all the sound would be from the champion's perspective, because the sound for the champion is much more important than it is for Odin Cam. And that brings us to the end of the 5th day. Day 6 was another decent day. I started by working on level 4, and after 2 or 3 hours of working on it, I decided it just wasn't coming together, deleted it, and restarted totally from scratch using a different polygon asset from Cinti again. And that time it worked, came together really well, and I moved directly on to the final big boss level where you confront Fenris Wolf. That came together pretty quickly as well. I didn't have to scrap much, and just really things came together there. Then, during this time, when I was working on all the levels, Kai was writing the entire story for the game. We wanted, the fact that our game had good story, or at least decent, funny story, to really stand out in the Game Jam, so that we would get some higher ratings there, which I think later down the line really helped, but not quite as much as we wanted it to. Another thing I did on that day was I added post effects to all the scenes, and that just made the project come together and look so much better. I cannot stress enough how much the post-processing effects changed the way our scene looked. The difference is just so drastic of just how it looks, how it feels to the player, and I think that was a real game changer for how we felt about the game. and how we thought it would work out. That brought us to the end of day 6, and that was a big mistake. We did not get enough done on that day. So, when we woke up on day 7, it was an absolute panic. We had to add all the story in, we had to make the final boss fight, we had to bug fix bosses because there were a few errors with them, we had to add all the mobs, all the enemies to all the levels, we had to add the title screen, we had to add the music, and it was just absolute chaos. We barely got it all done. I had been awake for 25 hours-ish when we submitted it with 2 minutes to spare on the clock. And man, I just fell into bed and passed out after that. 2 weeks later, voting had closed for the game and the results were announced. We didn't end up coming in first place for any of the categories, not even close really, but we managed to come in 101st in graphics, 103rd in audio, and 173rd overall, which is in the top 10% for the Jam, which we were really proud of. It's our first game jam, we've never made a game in this sort of time frame before, and we're just really pleased with those results. Top 10% out of 2,000 people was a really big accomplishment for us. One thing that we thought really hurt us in the ratings was the fact that literally no one had 2 people to play with. So a lot of the time we would get worse ratings on game design because people would get frustrated that it was so hard and that they couldn't control both players at the same time. Or they would be confused about the choice of using you and I to rotate the champion's camera. So that was sort of a big problem for us in our ratings. So we got rated pretty low in game design and also pretty low in fun because of that. One thing that we were really surprised about in our ratings is that we didn't do well in theme at all, even though that it was very accurate for the theme. Like, I couldn't think of a way that it would be more accurate. You are stronger together, stronger when you're playing together. And it's a really difficult game when you're playing alone. So that really surprised us and sort of dropped our ratings a bit more than they could have been. But overall, we are really pleased with the results of the Game Jam, and we learned about a lot about sort of how you need to design your game to make it shine in the eyes of the player, and how to make it accessible to everyone so that everyone can fully experience the way the game is meant to be played. If anyone's interested in downloading Ragnarok for themselves, it's available for free in the description. And if we get, let's put a big goal out there, 100 likes on this video, then we will consider fine-tuning Ragnarok, making it much more polished, and releasing it as a final release for all of you on the Steam store. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Make sure to follow us on our Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to the YouTube channel here. Links are all in the description. I would really appreciate any of your tips and advice that you can give me in the comments section about how to structure these videos and how I can improve them in the future. And I think that's it. See you all later.